Top 10 countries where being black is a serious challenge. Being black can change everything. The price you pay, the doors that open, and the ones that never even pretend to. And no, this isn't about being dramatic. It's about patterns. Real ones. Around the world, millions of black travelers, students, workers, and expats discover, sometimes within hours of arrival, that respect isn't universal. Smiles fade faster, questions get sharper, security checks get longer. Suddenly, you're not just a visitor, you're a situation. What makes this conversation uncomfortable is that many of these places are marketed as modern, safe, and welcoming. They appear on travel brochures, relocation lists, and glossy YouTube vlogs. But lived experience has a way of exposing what marketing carefully edits out. Studies on racial profiling, housing discrimination, and social exclusion show a consistent pattern. Black people are more likely to be questioned, denied access, or treated with suspicion in certain parts of the world, regardless of education, accent, or passport. In some places, the challenge is loud and obvious. In others, it's quiet, polite, and wrapped in bureaucracy. Which, let's be honest, can feel even worse. This video isn't here to tell you where not to go. It's here to help you understand what you might face, and why being informed is often the difference between a smooth experience and a stressful one. As this countdown unfolds, you'll notice a shift. The issues move from uncomfortable to systemic, from awkward moments to everyday barriers that wear people down over time. Welcome to Mr. Globe TV, where we talk about the world as it actually is, not just how it's sold. If you value honest travel conversations, global awareness, and stories that challenge assumptions, you're in the right place. Stick around till the end, because the final entry on this list is the one most people never expect. And before we begin, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment sharing where you've traveled and how your experience compared. Number 10. Italy. This is a country that smiles easily, gestures generously, and prides itself on warmth, yet somehow manages to make many black residents feel permanently out of place. The contrast is jarring, like being invited into someone's living room only to realize you're not allowed to sit on the couch. Here, racism is rarely explosive. It doesn't usually shout, it shrugs. It shows up as assumptions made before a word is spoken. Many black people, whether tourists, students, or citizens, are immediately labeled as migrants, often undocumented, regardless of accent, passport, or profession. You can be fluent, educated, and impeccably dressed, and still be treated as if you just stepped off a boat that exists only in someone else's imagination. Housing is where the reality really tightens. Rental discrimination in Italy isn't subtle, it's efficient. Phone calls end abruptly once your name is heard. Messages go unanswered after a profile photo is shared. Some landlords skip the dance altogether and simply say no. Not, the apartment is taken, just no. It's capitalism with a bias filter. Then there's policing. Italy's routine checks have a habit of being anything but random. Black men in particular are stopped, questioned, and asked for documents far more frequently than others. It's not always aggressive, but it's persistent, like a background hum reminding you that visibility comes with a price. Over time, that wears people down. You start planning exits, rehearsing explanations, keeping papers closer than your phone. And yet, Italy still charms. That's what makes this dynamic so confusing. The food is incredible, the history is breathtaking, the friendships, when they form, can be genuine and deep, which is exactly why the disconnect hurts more. You're surrounded by beauty, yet constantly nudged into a smaller box. Italy looks friendly on postcards, and it often is. But daily life can feel very different when you're repeatedly asked to prove you belong. That quiet tension, played out over years rather than moments, is why Italy opens this list at number 10. Number 9. South Korea. South Korea earns its place on this list for a reason that surprises many first-time visitors. The discrimination isn't hidden, it's normalized. In a society that values order, conformity, and clear social rules, exclusion can feel oddly procedural. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, just a polite refusal delivered with a smile that says, "This is how things are." Nowhere is this more visible than nightlife. Clubs and bars, especially in popular districts, have a long history of denying entry to black people outright. Sometimes there's a sign, sometimes it's a bouncer casually crossing his arms and shaking his head. No explanation needed, no apology offered. It's less personal insult and more bureaucratic dismissal, like being rejected by a vending machine that doesn't recognize your currency. These attitudes don't exist in a vacuum. South Korea's beauty standards are among the most rigid in the world, with skin tone playing a major role. Pale skin is still widely associated with status, refinement, and success. Darker skin, especially black skin, is often framed as the opposite. This creates a social hierarchy that quietly reinforces who is seen as desirable, respectable, or even safe to be around. And then there's media influence. For decades, blackness in Korean television and news has been disproportionately linked to crime, danger, or novelty. When your primary exposure to an entire group comes through exaggerated or negative portrayals, fear fills in the gaps where understanding should be. The result is a stereotype that follows black residents into everyday life, on subways, in stores, and during routine interactions that suddenly feel less routine. What makes South Korea especially challenging is that this discrimination is socially acceptable. It's rarely framed as racism. It's called preference, or safety, or culture. And because it's widely tolerated, pushing back can feel like arguing with gravity. You're not fighting an individual. You're pushing against a system that doesn't see the need to explain itself. This isn't subtle racism whispered behind closed doors. It's written on signs, enforced at doors, and defended as normal. South Korea remains a fascinating, innovative country with much to admire, but for many black visitors and residents, acceptance comes with clear, immovable conditions. And that clarity, however polite, is exactly why it earns its place on this list. Number 8. Russia. In Russia, hostility is not constant, but because fear is always nearby, quiet, watchful, and woven into the system itself. For many black travelers and residents, the unease begins almost immediately. Not with an insult or confrontation, but with the feeling that you've stepped under a permanent spotlight. In Russia, being visibly black often means being hyper-visible, whether you asked for the attention or not. The country's history plays a heavy role here. Racially motivated violence, particularly from far-right and nationalist groups, has been documented for decades. While the intensity has fluctuated over time, the memory hasn't faded. Stories circulate quickly within black communities, warnings passed along like survival tips. Avoid certain neighborhoods. Be cautious at night. Don't assume help will come quickly if something goes wrong. That collective memory shapes how Russia is experienced long before anyone arrives. Then there's the policing. Russia is known for its frequent document checks, but black foreigners report being stopped far more often than others. Passports are examined. Visas scrutinized. Questions linger longer than necessary. It's rarely aggressive, but it's persistent, like being tapped on the shoulder again and again just to confirm that you still belong where you're standing. Over time, these routine encounters stop feeling routine and start feeling personal. Nationalism adds another layer. Modern Russian identity is heavily tied to ethnicity, language, and a narrow idea of who looks Russian. Non-Slavs already sit outside that definition. Black people sit even further beyond it. Nationalist rhetoric, whether political or social, frames outsiders as threats, burdens, or curiosities. And once that framing exists, suspicion follows naturally. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. What makes this especially draining is that Russia doesn't pretend otherwise. There's little effort to soften the edges. You're expected to adapt, stay alert, and keep moving. Friendly interactions absolutely happen, sometimes unexpectedly so, but they exist alongside a system that treats certain bodies as inherently questionable. Racism. In Russia isn't about whispers exchanged behind closed doors. It's about who gets stopped, who gets watched, and who the system assumes needs explaining. That constant scrutiny, combined with history, policing, and nationalism, is why Russia stands firmly on this list. Number 7. China. China's place on this list has little to do with open hostility and everything to do with something more unsettling: dehumanization disguised as curiosity. On the surface, the country feels futuristic. Towering skylines, bullet trains, efficiency everywhere. But for many black residents and visitors, daily life unfolds at street level, where progress and prejudice coexist uncomfortably. Anti-black stereotypes in China didn't appear overnight. They've been reinforced for decades through television, advertising, and social media, where blackness is often framed as strange, comic, dangerous, or exotic. When an entire population learns about a group primarily through caricature, real people pay the price. That price shows up quietly, in assumptions, avoidance, and treatment that feels less than human. Housing is one of the first pressure points. Black residents frequently report being denied apartments with vague excuses or sudden, no availability. Schools can be another hurdle, where Black parents encounter resistance, excessive scrutiny, or unspoken discomfort around their children. Hospitals, places meant to feel neutral and safe, have also been cited as spaces where Black patients experience longer wait times, visible hesitation, or outright refusal, especially when language barriers exist. None of this comes with shouting or insults. It arrives wrapped in polite distance. For families, the experience can be particularly jarring. Black children are often stared at openly, photographed without permission, or treated like curiosities rather than classmates or neighbors. What's presented as harmless fascination can feel invasive, especially when it happens daily. Being constantly observed changes how freely people move, speak, and even breathe. You start calculating exits in places that were never meant to feel confining. The pandemic intensified everything. During COVID, Black people in several cities were disproportionately targeted, evicted, or denied services under the assumption that they were carriers of disease. That period didn't create anti-Black sentiment, it normalized exclusion. Once a society becomes comfortable singling out a group for safety, it's difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. What makes China particularly challenging is the lack of language around race. Discrimination is rarely acknowledged, which means it's rarely addressed. When harm has no name, it also has no solution. Friendly encounters absolutely exist, and many Black residents form meaningful relationships, but those moments live alongside a system that struggles to see Black people as fully ordinary. China's challenge isn't loud aggression, it's the slow erosion that comes from being treated as an object of curiosity rather than a person. And that quiet, persistent othering is exactly why China earns its place on this list. Number 6. Japan. Japan is on this list not because it is loud, aggressive, or openly hostile, but because its exclusion is impeccably polite. Everything works. Everyone bows, apologies flow effortlessly, and yet, for many Black residents and visitors, acceptance remains just out of reach, like a beautifully wrapped gift with no intention of being opened. One of the most cited issues is racial profiling. Black men in particular report being stopped by police far more frequently than others, often under the umbrella of routine checks. Passports are requested, questions linger, smiles remain polite, the interaction rarely escalates, but repetition has a way of sending a message. When you're stopped often enough, you stop believing it's random. It becomes clear that your presence alone triggers suspicion. Housing presents another quiet barrier. In Japan, landlords are legally allowed to refuse renters based on nationality, and in practice, Black renters often face an even steeper climb. Applications disappear. Phone calls end abruptly. Sometimes the refusal is refreshingly honest. Foreigners not allowed. Other times it's wrapped in layers of courtesy so thick you almost miss the rejection. Almost. Social life follows the same pattern. Exclusion in Japan isn't dramatic, it's ambient. Invitations don't come. Conversations stay surface level. You're treated well, but kept at a distance. Politeness becomes a kind of velvet rope. Soft to the touch, firm in its purpose. You're not mistreated. You're simply never fully let in. What makes this dynamic especially challenging is how easy it is to doubt your own experience. Japan's global reputation for kindness and order can make Black residents feel like the problem must be personal. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe you're being sensitive. But when patterns repeat across cities, jobs, and years, the truth becomes harder to dismiss. And yet, people still fall in love with Japan. The culture is rich. The food is unforgettable. The respect for public life is real. Many Black residents build meaningful friendships and find pockets of genuine belonging. But those moments exist alongside a system that wasn't designed with difference in mind. Japan doesn't shout racism. It doesn't need to. It locks it behind doors you'll never be invited through. And then bows politely as you walk past. That quiet, persistent exclusion is exactly why Japan earns its place on this list. Number 5. Ukraine. Ukraine earns its place on this list because of how unexpectedly revealing its challenges are. For many viewers, the shock isn't that racism exists, it's how clearly long-standing patterns surfaced when pressure was applied. The war didn't invent discrimination. It simply removed the curtain. For years, Ukraine has attracted African students, particularly in medicine and engineering. On paper, it looked like opportunity. In practice, many black students reported verbal abuse, social isolation, housing discrimination, and being treated as permanent outsiders. These weren't isolated incidents. They were recurring stories shared quietly in dorm rooms, group chats, and expat forums, easy to ignore until events made them impossible to dismiss. Crises have a way of exposing systems. During moments of mass displacement, unequal treatment became visible in real time. Black residents and students reported being delayed, questioned, or deprioritized during evacuations, while others moved freely. It wasn't chaos alone, it followed a pattern. When resources became scarce, so did patience for people who didn't look Ukrainian. That's when many realized the problem wasn't confusion, it was hierarchy. Legal protections offer little comfort here. Foreigners in Ukraine have limited recourse when discrimination occurs, and racial bias is often brushed aside as misunderstanding rather than misconduct. Complaints stall, accountability fades, racism becomes something to endure rather than resolve. It's less about overt hostility and more about the quiet understanding that help may not come. What makes this especially disorienting is how often discrimination is excused. It's not racism, people say, it's culture, or language barriers, or stress, or curiosity gone wrong. Over time, these explanations pile up like paperwork, plausible individually, exhausting collectively. When everything is explained away, nothing ever changes. And yet, Ukraine is not a monolith. Many Ukrainians are welcoming, generous, and genuinely supportive. Friendships form. Kindness exists. That contrast is what makes the exclusion sting. You're reminded that acceptance is possible, just not guaranteed, and not protected. War revealed what daily life had already been hiding, that for Black people in Ukraine, belonging has always been conditional. When things are calm, the barriers are subtle. When things fall apart, they become unmistakable. That uneasy truth, exposed under pressure, is exactly why Ukraine earns its place on this list. Number 4. The United Arab Emirates. On the surface, everything gleams. Glass towers, spotless streets, efficiency that feels choreographed. But beneath that polish runs a rigid social ladder, and where you stand on it is often decided long before anyone learns your name. In the UAE, racial hierarchy is closely tied to nationality and passport strength. Western passports float to the top. Regional passports settle somewhere in the middle. And Black Africans, regardless of education, experience, or fluency, are too often nudged toward the lower rungs. This isn't always announced. It's reflected in job offers, salaries, housing options, and the way authority is exercised. You start to notice patterns the way you notice gravity, by how consistently they pull in one direction. Workplace roles make the hierarchy visible. Black Africans are disproportionately concentrated in lower status positions, even when qualifications suggest otherwise. Advancement can feel like running on a treadmill set just slightly too fast. You're moving, working, proving, but not getting closer. Meanwhile, respect often hinges less on character or competence and more on where you're from and what stamp sits in your passport. Merit matters, but paperwork matters more. Social interactions follow the same script. Politeness is common, warmth less so. You may be treated courteously, yet still feel interchangeable. The city functions smoothly, but belonging feels conditional. Granted in layers, revoked quietly. It's a place where people are rarely rude, but often ranked. Reporting discrimination adds another complication. For non-citizens, speaking up can feel risky. Employment visas tie workers closely to employers, and legal protections are limited. Complaints don't just question behavior, they can jeopardize livelihoods. As a result, many choose silence, not because the issue is small, but because the cost of addressing it feels too high. The system doesn't need to silence people loudly. It relies on practicality to do the job. And yet, people still come. Opportunities exist. Safety is real. Many Black residents build stable lives and meaningful communities. The UAE isn't hostile, it's hierarchical. That distinction matters, but it doesn't make the experience easier. In the UAE, how you're treated often depends on where you're from, not who you are. When respect is filtered through nationality rather than humanity, Even the most luxurious setting can feel strangely limiting. That polished imbalance is exactly why the UAE earns its place on this list. Number 3. India. Here, the challenge for Black people isn't a single bad interaction. It's a social atmosphere shaped by extreme colorism that touches nearly every layer of life. From billboards selling skin-lightening creams to casual comments about complexion at family dinners, lighter skin is treated like a life upgrade. Darker skin, especially Black skin, is treated like a problem to be solved or avoided. For Africans living or studying in India, this hierarchy has real consequences. Reports of harassment, verbal abuse, and physical attacks have surfaced repeatedly over the years, particularly in neighborhoods with large student populations. These incidents are often framed as misunderstandings or isolated clashes, but the patterns are hard to ignore. Being followed in stores, stared at in public, or questioned aggressively isn't rare, it's routine. And when rumors start, they spread fast. One of the most damaging elements is mythology. Widespread false beliefs link Blackness to drugs, crime, or moral danger. These ideas didn't appear by accident. They've been passed down, reinforced by media portrayals, and amplified by misinformation. When a group is repeatedly described as a threat, people begin to act as if that threat is real. Suspicion becomes reflexive. Curiosity turns hostile. Police protection, when needed, can be inconsistent. Some officers intervene appropriately. Others hesitate, deflect, or minimize complaints. For Black victims, justice can feel optional, dependent on location, timing, and whether the situation is considered worth the trouble. That uncertainty compounds fear. When you're not sure help will arrive, you start modifying your behavior just to stay unnoticed. What makes India especially difficult is how normalized all of this is. Colorism is often defended as preference. Harassment is brushed off as ignorance. Violence is explained away as provocation. The burden of adjustment quietly shifts to the person experiencing harm. Blend in more. React less. Be patient. Over time, those expectations pile up like unpaid bills. And yet, India is complex. It's vibrant, intellectual, spiritual, and capable of deep kindness. Many Indians actively challenge racism and stand in solidarity. But systems matter more than intentions. When prejudice is woven into social norms, good individuals can only do so much. In India, racism isn't accidental. It's inherited, taught, and defended. That depth, persistence, and normalization are exactly why India ranks so high on this list. Number 2. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia nearly tops this list because its challenges aren't accidental. They're built into the structure of daily life. This is a country where hierarchy isn't just social, it's operational. And for many Black Africans, that hierarchy quietly sets a ceiling long before ambition ever enters the room. At the core of the issue is the labor system. Saudi Arabia relies heavily on foreign workers, but not all expats are treated equally. Nationality, race, and job category intertwine to determine status, freedom, and respect. Black Africans are disproportionately funneled into lower-paying, lower-protection roles, regardless of education or experience. The system doesn't need to insult you, it simply limits you. Like an elevator that technically works but never goes past a certain floor. Treatment reflects that structure. Compared to Western or Gulf expats, Black Africans often face harsher scrutiny, stricter supervision, and less tolerance for mistakes. Everyday interactions, at work, in housing, or with authorities, carry an unspoken assumption about where you belong. It's not always aggressive, often it's procedural, and that's what makes it so effective. Legal recourse is another pressure point. For non-citizens, reporting abuse or discrimination can feel risky. Employment visas are tightly tied to employers, and the power imbalance is obvious. Complaints may stall or quietly disappear, while retaliation remains a real fear. When justice feels optional, silence becomes a survival strategy. Not because people don't want fairness, but because the cost of asking for it can be too high. Social mobility is where the ceiling becomes most visible. Moving up, socially or professionally, is extremely restricted for Black Africans. Connections matter. Nationality matters more. Even long-term residents can find themselves frozen in place, contributing to a society that benefits from their labor without fully accepting their presence. You can live there for years and still feel temporary. What complicates the picture is that Saudi Arabia is changing. Reforms are underway. Cities are modernizing. Some attitudes are shifting. Many Saudis are respectful, curious, and kind on a personal level. But systems outlast intentions. And when a system quietly sorts people by race and origin, progress moves unevenly. Here, your skin color can quietly determine your ceiling. Not through open hostility, but through limits that are rarely explained and almost never challenged. That combination of structure, silence, and restriction is why Saudi Arabia sits so close to the top of this list. Number 1. Hungary. Hungary takes the top spot not because every interaction is hostile, but because the system itself is unwelcoming by design. This is a place where exclusion doesn't rely on whispers or awkward silences. It's reinforced from above, repeated often enough that it starts to feel like common sense rather than policy. Government rhetoric has played a central role. For years, public messaging has framed non-European migrants as threats to culture, safety, and identity. When leaders speak this way, it trickles down into media, into everyday conversations, into how strangers look at you on a tram. Xenophobia becomes normalized, not as an extreme view, but as a reasonable position. Once that happens, discrimination no longer needs defending, it simply exists. For Black residents, this creates an atmosphere of constant scrutiny, being watched in stores, being followed on public transport, being asked questions that aren't really questions at all. Many describe the feeling of surveillance not as paranoia, but as pattern recognition. When the same things happen often enough, coincidence stops being convincing. Isolation compounds the problem. Hungary has a very small Black population, which means fewer informal support systems and almost no social buffer when things go wrong. There's safety in numbers, and here, the numbers just aren't there. If you're mistreated, there's little reassurance that someone nearby understands or will step in. You learn quickly that visibility doesn't come with protection. What makes Hungary especially difficult is the lack of contradiction. In some countries, prejudice exists alongside strong public opposition. Here, resistance feels muted. When xenophobia is politically normalized, challenging it can feel like arguing with the weather. You don't debate it, you plan around it. Change routes, shorten stays, keep your head down. This doesn't mean hostility is constant. Many Hungarians are polite, helpful, even warm in one-on-one interactions. But individual kindness struggles to offset structural signals that say certain people don't belong. And structure matters. It shapes housing access, policing behavior, and how quickly authorities respond when something goes wrong. Living in Hungary as a Black person often means navigating a country that doesn't quite know what to do with you, and isn't particularly interested in learning. You're not violently rejected, you're persistently excluded. Over time, that wears deeper than open confrontation ever could. Hungary isn't just challenging, it's structurally unwelcoming, from the top down. When exclusion is embedded in rhetoric, reinforced by policy, and echoed socially, it stops feeling situational and starts feeling permanent. That's why Hungary stands firmly at number 1 on this list. We've reached the end, and if you've stayed all the way through, thank you. That matters. Because this list wasn't designed for shock value. It was built to show a pattern. Across the countdown, we saw different faces of the same reality. In some places, the challenge came through casual assumptions and social exclusion. In others, it showed up as profiling, restricted mobility, or systems that quietly decide who belongs and who doesn't. What connects every country on this list is not hatred alone, but structure. Laws, norms, and attitudes that make life harder for Black people in ways that are often invisible until you experience them firsthand. This video wasn't about declaring places good or bad. It was about understanding how history, politics, culture, and power intersect with race, and why awareness is just as important as a passport when you cross borders. Many of these countries are beautiful. Many are innovative. Many are home to kind, generous people. But systems outlast individuals, and patterns matter more than intentions. If this video challenged your assumptions, informed your travel plans, or simply gave language to experiences you've already had, then it's done its job. Before you go, support the conversation. Like the video so more people see it. Subscribe to Mr. Globe TV for honest global insights that don't shy away from uncomfortable truths. And most importantly, share your story in the comments, whether you agree, disagree, or want to add perspective. This conversation doesn't end here. It grows with every voice that joins it.